Okay. Now I'm late again. Okay, so let me put this here. Move these. All right, so we're going to start on emotional memory, Roger. Actually, let me just try to do this again. And I'm not sure what happened last time. I got off on it. Okay, so the next 3 points that I want to make, I think, are extremely important parts. And of course, you'll hear me go, now this is really important and this is really important, but really these 3, I think, are extremely important. And so the first one is emotional memory. And this is something that took me years to figure this out. Because like at the end of my mother's disease, because my mother went all the way to the end. Okay, and so she didn't know who I was. She didn't know my name, but she knew that I was someone that she loved and that she trusted. Okay, and so back in about 2015, I think I was speaking for UT Medical Science in Houston, and this young man walked up to me and he said, I can't get my mother to do anything. And I said, well, do you argue with her? And he's like, yes. And I said, do you force her to do things that she doesn't want to do? And he's like, yes. And I said, all these tips I've been talking about, okay? And so what I learned is that, when y'all walk out of here today, you're going to walk out and you're going to think, without even thinking about it, you're going to interpret these talks and you're going to go, that was a good talk or that wasn't a good talk. And you're going to do it automatically. You're not even going to think about it. And so people with Alzheimer's do the same thing. That's something that they never lose. So what happens is, and when I'm really talking to healthcare professionals, I really harp on this point too, but if you force them to do something they don't want to do and they get upset, they file it back. If you argue with them, then, they file it back. And I don't know what that magic number is, but at some point, many times, they will start associating with you a negative emotional memory. And then they're never going to do anything that you ask again. And it's really unfortunate if it happens somewhere, at a facility or someplace, because then they walk in the room, they're frightened of you, they're not going to do what they ask them to do, and then what are our 2 instincts are fight or flight, which gets you into trouble. And so it's really important to understand that they never lose that emotional memory. I mean, it's really interesting. And so I've been working with this gentleman. He said, well, do you think I can get it back? And I said, I don't really know, because what's their disability? Short-term memory loss. So even though you can sit down with them and you can say, you know what, Mom, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have fought with you about that or argued with you about that. And I mean, it has to be pretty extensive, okay? And a lot of times they have a background of some abuse, in the background. I mean, in their youth, because as they're traveling back, any issue they had growing up, they're going to deal with again, okay? So very important to all these things that I've been talking about, how you communicate and things, and it's not easy. We all know that, are so important for this main reason. You never want them to associate with you a negative emotional memory, because then they're never going to do anything that you've asked. Now, the only other time, well, with some caregivers through the years, I have observed a negative emotional memory, but I think that sometimes it's interesting. If they grew up being abused by a cousin or an older brother or someone that was just mean to them all the time, and if you kind of look like that person, then they can start associating with that person a negative emotional memory, but it's more due to the background, because, as we talked about, as a disease progresses, their age regresses. So a lot of times if it's a second marriage and your husband cheated on you or vice versa, they will tend to put those things onto their new husband, because as they travel through that time in their life, that's what they were dealing with, and they often think that their new spouse is doing the same thing. So emotional memory is really important, and why we want to speak kindly and end our sentences with something positive, all those things, because we never, ever, ever want them to associate with us a negative emotional memory. But the good thing is At the end of the disease, even though my mother didn't know my name or she didn't know who I was, she always loved me and trusted me. And I think that's important because it didn't matter so much that she didn't know my name or that she didn't know I was her daughter. What mattered is that we still spent good, positive time together, and that she knew she loved me and she knew that I loved her. So I think that's important because it hurts us when they don't know who we are anymore. They don't call us by name. So just remind yourself when you get to that point, it's the emotional memory that's important. And so the next point is creative communication. When my mom was first diagnosed, I called the nurse and I was talking to her and I said, I have no idea what Alzheimer's disease is. I said, only thing I know is that it affects your memory. And so she went through all this stuff. And, when I hung up the phone and I was playing back the conversation in my mind, one of the things that stuck in my mind is she said, you'll learn to be a good liar. And I thought to myself, I meant to go back and ask her, what does she mean by that? Well, it doesn't take too long when you realize that, so let me back up. So our job as a caregiver is to keep our loved ones calm, safe, and happy. Okay, that's our job. And so, we always, we learn throughout this disease to stay one step ahead of them. Well, because what's important is the moment. What's important to them and what's important to you is the moment they're in right now. And so, I told you my mother, that she always would say, what's wrong with me? And she would cry. And so, I would say, well, BB, you had a stroke and it affected your short-term memory. Who cares if you can't remember a few things? I can't remember what I did yesterday. I'd say, but you're smart, and I said, you're healthy and you're beautiful. And then one day I said to her, and you know what, BB, you're taking this medicine and you're getting better every day. And I went, I just lied to my mother. And then I looked at her and she said, oh, thank you. And she quit crying. And I thought, aha, that's what the nurse was talking about, And so I told my mother to the day she died that she was getting better every day because it gave her hope. I don't think there's anything wrong with giving them hope. Now, so this, spills over. So we're going to talk about, redirection in a few minutes. But this creative communication, again, we're talking about the moment we're in. What is it that I have to say to keep her calm in this moment? So I'll give you some more examples. So one night, so now I'm living with my mom, and I'm in her bedroom, and she walks in and she looked at me and she said, does my mom, does she know I'm here? You see, now I understand that means she's in her adolescence. Think about our children when they're frightened. What do they want? They want to go home, and they want their mother. And so she's looking at me, like, does my mom know I'm here? And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this is a new one. Okay, think, And so I said, well, BB, she called about 30 minutes ago, and she said that she has to work late, and she wants you to spend the night with me. Isn't that great? We're going to have so much fun. We're going to eat some popcorn, and we'll watch a movie. And she's looking at me like, I am really not sure I believe a single word you're saying. But because it was positive, she went with me. And so, so then you kind of learn that this is just something that you do throughout this disease, and this is kind of it's somewhat very much related to redirection. You have to think about what their background is, what their likes and dislikes are. Because I was speaking at a place in a facility in Greers Ferry, I think, and so I was talking about this, and a nurse raised her hand, and she said, "Yeah, one of our sweet little ladies was standing by the door, going, my mom's coming to get me. I'm waiting for her." And she said, "Oh, well, she's at work, and she'll be back in a little while." And the girl became very frightened of her, and it's because her mother never had a job. So it's very important when you're doing these things, especially, if you work at, we have so many great places here, memory cares, that it's so important to learn who it is you're taking care of. What is their background? What is their likes? What are their dislikes? Because that's what you use, when you're being creative in your communication or you're doing some redirection, I'll just throw in here. And so I will tell you, it takes somewhere between 7 to 10 sentences to redirect a thought, okay? And I'm getting off into that, but it's really important to so many of my caregivers will say, I will never lie, to my wife or my husband or my mother or my dad. And I'm like, it's not really lying. I believe the good Lord is up there saying, good job, because our goal, again, is to keep them calm. If I had said to my mother, you know what, BB, your mom died, 20 years ago, she would have said, what? She died? And then she would have relived the whole experience. And so in a way, you're being a blessing to them. But it's hard. And it's something that you have to learn to do. I mean, once you kind of get to where you're being creative or you're doing this redirection, it's almost something that happens every day. And the sad thing is you get pretty good at it. I remember thinking, there is nothing she can come up with that I can't come up with something now. And then I thought, whoa, that is pretty scary, that you can kind of, create something that fast. But it's one of the hardest things that you do. With this disease, I believe, because it's very unnatural for us to be dishonest, especially to someone that we love. But you will learn as the disease goes, it's a really important part of it. And it's hard, but once you do it and it works, like with my mom, then you're like, okay, it's like, we feel so guilty about things. And I talk to caregivers a lot about changing that guilt to grace. Grace is, you're never going to do it right with this disease. You're just not. It's impossible because you're dealing with the brain. And because it's your first rodeo, you don't even understand what it is you're up against or, what all of your options are. I mean, you really don't understand those things. I didn't either. I had no idea. I mean, I was telling Mike earlier today, I said, I'm going down a rabbit hole here, my daughter would say, but I'm thinking we had another year and a half with my mother, and my dad's still trying to save her and getting her on a trial, and he brings a nurse in, and the nurse said, you need to call hospice. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about, hospice? And I look, well, how long can you set him up? And she goes, 6 months. And I said, well, can you re-up it? I was shocked. Then I cried, of course, and she was gone in 3 months. I thought we had a year and a half. I really did. I'm like, we got another year and a half of this. I don't know why I thought that. I just did. So anyway, as I kind of got off track there, but anyway, creative communication is just a huge part of this, and you can't feel guilty. It's just part of the disease. I mean, it just really is. So this is the other really big point, and one of the things Mike and I were talking about earlier. So when I first started speaking with my dad, I was talking to him about, really want to talk to people about you have to learn to live in their world. And I said, I really don't understand, how to make this point where it's understandable. And so I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, here's my analogy. So the good news is I'm a grandmother. The bad news is they live in California. So I got on an airplane, I flew out to California. Violet, my oldest granddaughter, was about 2. And so I got to their apartment, and I put my luggage down, and I walked in her bedroom, and I sat down on the floor, and, she came and got in my lap, and we read books, and then she got bored with that. So then she wanted to play dress up. So we got up, and we put on funny jewelry and hats and scarves and sang songs and danced around, until she got bored with that. Well, then she wanted to show me her stuffed animals, so we walked over to her bed, and she was telling me all about her stuffed animals, and then my daughter Whitney walked in the room, and she said, it's time for Violet to take a nap. And I was like, oh, okay. So I picked her up, and I gave her a hug and a kiss, and I gave her to my daughter Whitney, and then I stepped out of the room. So what did I just do? When I stepped in that room with Violet and I sat down on the floor, I lived in her world. We did whatever she wanted to do, however she wanted to do it. It didn't matter. Now, if she walked over to an electrical outlet, I would have said, no, we can't touch that. That'll hurt you. But otherwise, we did whatever she wanted to do, however she wanted to do it. And so, but then when I stepped back out of that room, then I stepped into our world. So this is what's hard about being a caregiver is We're living out here in our world. We've got the house, the yard, the dogs. What am I fixing for dinner? I've got all these loads of laundry to do. Got to get the kids to school or whatever the situation is. We're living in our world. But when you step in that room with your loved one, then you're stepping into their world and what are their abilities. And it's a hard transition because you're constantly going back and forth. And even when you're in that room with them, you're thinking about things that I need to be doing or I should be doing. And the best advice that I can give you, especially when you're dealing with this disease, is learn to let go. It's hard. But, when you're in there with them, enjoy the moment. Because chances are it's as good as it's going to get. They start off good, but slowly they have that decline, and it's really hard. Believe me, it took me a while to get to this point. But it's just like you can't expect to take an 18-month-old and sit at dinner and be quiet for an hour and a half. You can't expect someone that has Alzheimer's to do it either. Not without someone sitting right next to them and help them, just like we talked about earlier. I mean, dinners are one of the areas my mom would get frustrated, because I'd talk to my sister or talk to my dad, and I'd ignore her a little bit, and then she'd want to go home. So living in their world is really, really important, and it's probably one of the most important things I'm going to say to you today because, you're just going back and forth all the time. Healthcare professionals, you're walking into this room, you're dealing with this person, you're stepping into their world. What are their abilities? What can they do? What can they not do? What are their eyes telling you? You walk in that room, you always look at the eyes and say, what are the eyes telling me? Where is she? Is she up here or is she down here? And so it's just hard, but enjoy the time that you have together. Because one of the things that you don't ever want to do is look back on your time as a caregiver, which, by the way, is the greatest gift you can do for anybody, is being a caregiver, is saying, shoulda, woulda, coulda. I should have spent more. I should have been more present in the time, because you never get that time back. But you should also give yourself a pat, and a hug because, again, the greatest gift you can give to someone is being a caregiver, and you're never going to do it right. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to get tired. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. It's just part of it. I did. Believe me, I can stand up here and talk to you because I made all the mistakes. Okay. So we're going to move on. Never talk about them in front of them. I mean, they can understand a lot more than they can articulate all the way to the end of the disease. If you have to talk about them, step out of the room, or, now you can text message and things like that. But just don't talk about them and don't whisper. My sister and I, we'd kind of get back in the room, especially, when she was in one of those dips. And we'd be like, oh, gosh, look what she's doing. What do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And she'd say, what are you doing? Who are you, what do you, she knew we were talking about her, she'd be like, hey, who are you talking about? You could see those eyes, go from normal to frustrated and angry in a matter of minutes. So you can't, don't whisper around them. It's really important when you communicate with them to look them straight in the eyes, because if you don't, they won't trust you. Refusing care, oops, it's touchy. This is one of the things that we just fully don't always understand, what's going on when this happens. But I think the most important thing is, we want to make sure that they understand what it is we're asking. One of the things that I've heard is that they only understand about every fourth word, and so that makes it hard for them to understand what it is that you're saying. If they're only understanding every fourth word, then I was thinking when I heard that, should we slow down talking to, because that can be very hard. But I think the most important thing is any time you're trying to get them to do anything, you got to think about your body language, your facial expressions. You got to put a smile on your face and always make it sound like fun, and that you're going to have a good time. Do it. Again, you don't want to say, do you want to take a bath? Do you want to do this? Because they're going to tell you no most of the time. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? It's even when you walk in a room, or caregivers really tend to say a lot of times, do you remember this or do you remember that person? Because they just are trying to get a glimpse of what they can remember. But actually, a lot of times it will put them on the spot and make them nervous. So it's really better to say, I remember when we did this. I remember when we did that. Sorry, I'm going down some rabbit holes here. Somebody must need to hear this because I usually pray about it. But so anyway, the main thing is refusing care is keep it simple. Help them understand what it is you're doing. Have everything there before you start. If it's bathing, you're putting a Band-Aid on, anything that you're doing, just keep it simple. I mean, to me, that's the best way to get them to do anything. So creating a safe environment. This is something that's really interesting and that really caregivers don't even think about. I never even thought about this when I started taking care of my mother, was what our environment was. And so, it's really important to keep the world very simple, keep them safe and consistent. Some of the things that they tell you to do is, clear clutter off of end tables, really clutter in general, because after a while it's overwhelming. It's one of those areas where it's hard to, to take things in. Of course, my mother, we are clutter. I mean, you walked in my house right now, you'd go, she is clutter. My daughter was like, keep things simple, get rid of all that stuff, but people, especially as we age, we have our little things that we love, but they talk about clearing away clutter off of end tables, pulling up rugs, out of the hallway because they will trip. If you have a loved one that does this, where the carpet changes to tile or hardwood or anything like that, and they do this, and they'll go like that, they're losing their eyes. Doesn't mean that they're going to go blind. It just means that they're going to lose they probably already lost the ability to read, or to tell time. But my mother was like that, and I tried to figure out what does that mean, and you come up with all these different things. And so later in life, the people that you see like that look like this, they're looking down at their chest, they can't see. They can't see very far. My mother got to where we'd take her to a baseball game, and she. She'd sit down and she'd go, let's go. And we'd be like, Mom, you love baseball. But it's because she couldn't see the field. I mean, we didn't even understand that, because we didn't realize that she couldn't see very far. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. I felt like maybe I needed to say that to somebody. I'm going way down rabbit holes today. So anyway, it's really important, though, back to safe environment. It's real important to keep like your toothbrush and your toothpaste together, because we had Bengay in the drawer one time, and my mother picked up the Bengay and put it on her toothbrush, and that was not a fun afternoon. In the bathrooms, I think it's really good to use double-sided tape on your rugs, because it's nice to have a rug in your bathroom, and until they get to a point where it's unsafe, and then just take up the rug in general. It's important to baby-proof your house. I can't tell. I'm not doing a very good job on that. Baby-proof your house. It's important to put all your cleaning products, alcohol, just get them out of reach or lock them up. We were cleaning the house one day. My mother picked up bleach and started to drink it. I was like, Mom! Never entered my mind that she would pick up a bottle of bleach and try to drink it. It just was crazy. They talk about removing poisonous plants, but definitely, if you don't live with them and you go into their house, check their refrigerator. Chances are they're going to have spoiled food, and you should check their cabinets too, because you'll be surprised what you find out of date, because that's just been sitting there for months. It's important to block off the stairs, with the gate, so they can't go up the stairs or down. And then a really important one is turn down the hot water heater, especially if they like to shower, because it doesn't take very long before they, when they're in the shower and they're like, do you pull, do you push, do you turn, how do you turn it off? Because where are they? Are they in the valley or are they up here? But I remember my mom, kind of doing this and thinking, oh my gosh, she's going to scald herself. So you definitely want to turn down your hot water heater. In the kitchen, you want to remove knobs off of stuff. One of the things that happens quite often is We go in to cook a meal, they get a phone call or something distracts them, they walk out of the room, and because our disability is short-term memory loss, they forget to walk back into the kitchen. They don't even remember that they're cooking a meal. And so that's how fires get started. So they talk about removing the knobs, or you can just unplug it. If it's easy to a point where you can unplug it, then you can plug it back in fairly easy, if you're going to cook in there. One of the if knives and sharp utensils, you want to put away. I remember I wasn't able to go to very many support groups. They didn't really have very many back then. But one of the things they talked about is they can get a knife and and come after you, and then you get a pillow and do this, and so they always talk about knives and putting any kind of sharp utensil away. But I think it's smart to put away any kind of small appliance like a toaster, anything like that. And then here's the thing, excuse me, you're going to have accidents, things that happen, but if you just take some of these safety precautions, it's going to help you in the long run and help you not to have the accidents. Okay, we talked about the double-sided tape. So at night, my mom was a wanderer, and she was up at night. That's really what about killed me, is she was up night after night, and she would wake up about midnight. She'd sleep about 2 hours, and she'd rub her sheets, and then she would get up. And so there are things that you can do. You can buy like mats and put them on the floor, like from PetSmart. It's one of those mats that you put on your couch when a dog jumps up that makes a noise. So when they step out of the bed and they step on that mat, it will make a noise and you can hear it, because I laid awake at night with one eye open all the time, primarily because she was always up. But they have cool lasers now. They have all kind of new bed alarms that you can put on your beds to help alert you. If you don't sleep in the same room with them, I think you need a baby monitor so you can at least watch them, because they're sneaky. My mom would sneak out of that bed, and then she was always looking for a way out. And it was really interesting. She would squeeze around a chair and a window, just to try to figure out a way out, and I would just watch her. I'd be up with her. And so, one thing, though, she slipped and fell one night because we left the newspapers on the floor. So pick up the newspapers. It's good to have a little night light. So if they get up, they can see a little bit, but too much light kind of wakes them up. So there's a happy medium there. It's really good to put a night light in the bathroom, because that way, at least if they need to go to the bathroom, they can walk in there and see. Let's see, this one, it printed funny. I got to turn it over. So here we go. Keep newspapers off the floor. You always want to make sure that wherever it is you think they want to go, it needs to be a clear path. You just don't want to keep, set down a laundry basket or set things down in the way. If it's especially going to the bathroom or going to their favorite chair or going into the kitchen, areas like that. It's just important to keep things clean and decluttered. It really helps them. But again, it's night lights in the bathroom, but really never, please, please, please don't leave your loved one at home if they can't respond to any kind of an emergency. If they don't know how to dial 911 or they can't call you or your sister or whoever, please don't leave them at home. That's the hardest point, and that's a whole nother talk about when it is to do something with your loved one, but it's usually earlier than you ever anticipate. You just can't leave them at home. They just reach a point where in that slide, in the probably this third slide, when I was talking about as the disease progresses or age regresses, in this article that I read back in about 2009, it said at the end of the early stage, they go all the way back to 8 years old. And then in the middle stage, it's 7 to 4, and the end stage, it's 3 to 0. So every now and then when I'm talking to a caregiver and they just do not want to do something with their mom, I said, would you leave an 8-year-old home alone? No, you just wouldn't. Here's the thing, they're frightened. Women are just more frightened than men. But anyway, so let's see, 110. So we're going to go into doing some things like dressing. I told you my mom, she went from a 4 to a 12. So one day we were in the closet, and she's trying to find something to wear, and she just can't get her pants, buttoned. And she looked at me, she goes, "I'm getting so tall." And I said, "We're all getting tall, BB, one too many milkshakes." But so, the thing about dressing, eating, bathing, things like that we do every day, it's so important to keep it a positive experience. Because we do it every day. And so with my mom, one of the things that we did is I limited her to 2 choices. You want to wear this or you want to wear this, And then, there's 2 schools of thoughts where, you can lay the clothes out in order, where they can do it. We did do that a lot, but I'm one of these, and a lot it depends on the personality of the person you're taking care of, but, I'd always step in. If she couldn't get the buttons buttoned, I'd step in and help her. I'd go, who makes these buttons these days? Every button's different. Every shoe can be different, whatever it is that you're dealing with. But it's real important not to rush them. You got to give them plenty of time really to do whatever it is they're doing, but especially when they're getting dressed. Let them do it at their own time. And it's really best not to organize anything in the morning because sure as the world, they're not going to want to get dressed. They don't want to eat breakfast. We learned in our experience you want to do things, 11 to 3, potentially. But, there's some reasons, too, why they have issues. Like my mom, I said, she was losing her eyesight, so she would have a hard time doing things. And this is where those cognitive abilities come in that we talked about. As the disease progresses, those, as they start losing their cognitive abilities, becomes more rapid, and it's just shocking to us. We're just like, she could do that yesterday. Why can she not do it today? And so it's just really important to be patient. I always like to tell people, think about how you would want to be treated. How do you, if that were you in that situation, how would you want people to talk to you? But it's hard, because we're human and we get frustrated and we get tired. But so another thing about clothes too is sometimes they're afraid. They can be really afraid to take their clothes off. My mother, when she was nearing the end of the disease, it was almost like a violation, taking off her clothes. She wore a gown for about a month. Literally could not get the gown off of her. And, during this time, too, you just, you pick your battles. What's important and what's not important. Okay, if she wanted to keep that gown on and we just, there's some great stuff called no-rinse soap and no-rinse shampoo that is a lifesaver during those times. And so, you just pick your battle. Was taking that gown off that important that it was just terrifying to her? No. It just really wasn't. It's hard because you just like, we got to put on something, something fresh, but she just wouldn't take it off. It's really interesting. Okay, so we're going to go into some eating real quick. I'll come. She will not remember. So the interesting thing about eating is because their disability is short-term memory loss, they're not going to remember that they've eaten. My mother never remembered. It doesn't take very long into the disease that, you can kind of test them periodically and say, did you eat lunch today? What did you eat? The problem is if you weren't with them, you don't ever really know if they're telling you the truth or not because they'll just make something up. But, so most of the time they do not remember. A lot of people, I think it's good to eat healthy, especially if they're healthy eaters. I think that's good. But my dad was like, we're going to put her on this diet and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And we're like, okay, Dad. We ate McDonald's, Taco Bell, and Sonic, every day. And so because, again, I think, to me it's a battle. It's just a battle that you want to pick. And to me, it's no time to diet. I was not going to tell my mother no. If she wanted something, she got it, And so, but if they don't want to eat, you can't force them to eat. They'll hit a phase where everything is no. And so if you just make food and put it in front of them, you don't even have to say a word to them. Just set it down there, and then you just start eating. A lot of times that, they will mimic you, especially in the eating process. But if you set food around them, they're usually going to eat it. So, But don't force them, because you want to keep it positive. Eating is something you do every day, and you want it to be positive. So one of the interesting things, too, is they say, this is from the Alzheimer's Association, serve food with different colors and textures, to use plain colored dishes that don't have a pattern. Sometimes, especially when they're having problems with their eyes, it's hard to distinguish the pattern on the plate to the food. My mother, had issues with that because of her eyes. A lot of times we would put food in bowls because it was easier, for her to eat. And then really finger foods are great, especially as a disease progresses, chicken fingers and things like that they can pick up and eat are very dementia friendly. If they refuse to eat, many times it's because there's too many choices on the plate. So sometimes what we would do is put one thing on the plate at a time and let her eat that and then put another thing on the plate. We would, a lot of times, especially, as they're nearing the end of the middle stage, they just don't know, a lot of times they just don't know how to get started. It's because they're down here, they're in the valley. How do I get started? What do I do? So we would just pick up our silverware and start to eat and see if she would pick hers up too, because many times they will. But then if they don't, then I would say, well, here, Mom, let me help you. And then once you kind of help them a little bit, sometimes they can take over and do it themselves. There were days we fed her, and then the next day she could eat just fine. So it's kind of confusing from a caregiver standpoint, because what does that mean? They can do it one day and they can't. It's because are they up here on top of the hill or they're in the valley? But what always occurs at some point in time, which we hit on just a little bit earlier, is they always reach a point where they don't know that they don't know anymore. They lose the insight into themselves, and ultimately they will get to a point to where you feed them all the time. And then you just take your time, put some music on, make it a good experience, because you want them to eat. I never cared that my mother was gaining weight, because I knew at one point she was going to stop eating. And so, weight is just something not to worry about. I mean, it's just really not with this disease. So, whoops, I was off on that one. So now we're going to go into redirection. So this is very much similar to creative communication, but redirection is you're just trying to change their thought process. It's something that you do throughout the disease, and really, again, you take everything that we've talked about today. Speaking calmly, no means no, don't argue, don't correct them, don't do all those things, is everything that you put into, the emotional memory, the creative communication, everything that we've talked about goes into redirection. But I think the most important thing is you have to be positive in your approach. And it's just like with the creative communication, you have to sell it to them. You can't be meek and mild when you're trying to redirect the thought process, especially if it's an important one. You can't go, oh, well, Mom, your mom she called me a little while ago, and I'm not looking her in the eyes. You got to look him in the eyes. You got to almost believe it, and you got to look him in the eyes, and you got to have positive body language, because you're selling it to her. Okay, when you're redirecting someone, you are selling them to do it. And, you have to be calm. You have to be positive. You've got to make it sound like, you've got to put a smile on your face. And again, it takes about, anywhere, on the low side, 6 sentences. It's more like 8 or 10 sentences to really change a thought. And I'm gonna give you an example in a minute. But it's important that you know the person's, their likes, their dislikes, their background, because those are the things that you use when you're trying to redirect them. And so here, we'll go into some examples here. How do you do it? So I'm going to use some healthcare professional examples here for a minute. But so if you're trying to get some people to go into the dining room, and again, you gotta say it in a way that makes them want to go. You got to be positive, but rather than just saying, gosh, okay, let's go to the dining room, because they may not understand what it is you're saying. Are they up here on top of the hill, or are they down here in the valley? So rather than, so you want to try to pique their interest. What is it? So I something along the lines like, I heard they have the best chicken today. Ooh, you know what? I'm hungry. Are you hungry? I've been hungry all day. Ooh, can you smell that? I bet you they've got something sweet in there too. You want to go with me? You want to go with me down there and see what they have? You know, you just make it almost childlike because you got to think of who it is you're dealing with. They're generally, especially by the time they go into, you know, a place like Avenir, you know, they're single digits. You know, you're mainly dealing with a child, which is a hard concept to understand anyway, because you're looking at your mom, your dad, your husband, or your wife. But, you know, most of the time you're dealing with a child. So if you make it sound like fun, you know, with my mom, I'd go, ooh, Mom, I've got a surprise for you. You know, I'd just look at her and that'd get her excited, you know, for a minute. And so, you know, you just always want to try to make it exciting. You know, again, it's kind of hard, but, you know, the most important thing is you want to make it fun. And you got to sell it. You got to look him right in the eyes, you know, and why don't we go do this? Why don't we go down? I bet you they have chocolate chip cookies. Oh, it's my favorite. Love chocolate chip cookies. You know, what's your favorite cookie, you know, if you're able to say something like that. But you know, another thing is, again, this is kind of gone over that. I can't see that up there. Continued. I can't see that. Okay, anyway, so, you know, again, the whole process here is we're redirecting their steps. We're redirecting their thought process. And, you know, it's just like, so I'm going to give another healthcare professional example. So, you know, if you're walking by and you see, so here's John. John is a person here staying at this place. And you know, you kind of walk by and you see that, I think this is falling off. Again, our goal is to make it sound happy. We're trying to change their thought process, their steps, and we got to sell it, okay? And so, you know, if you're walking by and you see John, or your mom, you know, but actually this is more of a healthcare professional. But, and so you see John is, you know, you're going to look at his eyes. You're going to see where he is in his mind, and you can see his eyes are, you know, he's excited, he's getting confused, you know, he doesn't know where he is, and you know, maybe you're standing by someone, let's just say John and Mary. You can say, hey, Mary, have you ever met John? You know, John is, did you know John was in the Navy? Is the Navy, is that right, John? Were you in the Navy? You know what, my dad was in the Navy too. You know, was it World War II that you fought in? You know, that's so exciting. Just really appreciate you, you know, fighting for our country, and, you know, we're where we are today because of you. And so, you know, you're just changing that thought process. You almost just ramble in some respects, you know, you just ramble a little bit on, you know, wherever you're trying to take him. John loves to talk about the Navy, you know, so that's something that you can do is redirect that thought process into the Navy. But if you're a healthcare, you know, facility, or, you know, you want to learn as much as you can about that person you're taking care of. Talk to the family, ask them about, what have you done? You know, what are things that you did while you're taking care of this person that worked? You know, the more information you have, the easier it is. Now, with my mom, you know, when I'd start to lose her, you know, I would think to myself, what just happened that caused this to happen? You know, what did I do, or what is the environment around us that caused my mom to change so quickly? You know, you work backwards. You know, that helps you to figure out, you know, what caused this behavioral change, and then, you know, your mom is, you know, you also want to ask yourself, you know, again, you're going to look in their eyes. What are the eyes telling you? You know, for a long time into the disease, the eyes are going to tell you where they are. Are they frustrated? Are they angry? Are they frightened? You know, and then you cater what you say. If they're frightened, you know, don't, you know, hey, Mom, it's Betsy. I'm your daughter. I love you. You're safe. I'm not going to leave you. Really important 2 sentences to say to women. You know, if they're angry, oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. What, you know, did I hurt your feelings? You know, you know, I'm sorry. You know, there's just lots of different ways to redirect. But again, I'd clap my hands, you know, because when I'd clap my hands, it just gave me a few seconds to redirect that thought process, because it would startle her. You know, she'd look at me funny, and then I'd go, BB, you know, why don't we go get a milkshake or something along those lines? Sorry, am I getting quiet? But anyway, so I'm going to stop because I've got and do some question and answering. So I appreciate y'all coming out today. And is there anybody that has any questions that I can answer? Yes, ma'am. So I'll be honest with you. When I was taking care of my mother, so in a home or in a facility, you can't use bed rails. That they won't allow you to. I would have used them at home myself because my mom was always getting out of bed. But again, as long as it's not, a safety issue, that's where you have to look at. I often thought I should have used bed rails. It at least would have slowed her down till I could get around the bed, to help her. But there are a lot of different things you can use. There are lasers, and there are all kind of little bed alarms that you can use now. Right, and that's a hard thing. So what I would do, what I suggest is you email the nurse or call the nurse the day before. I would call them and I would email them both with everything that's going on. And then I would say, when you're talking to her, look at her, don't look at me. Because they tend to look at you and not them, and then that would make my mom mad. And just explain to them, I can't say this in front of her, but this is what's going on. And it's really frustrating when if the doctor won't listen to you and won't do it that way, change doctors. Because they're never going to get a truthful answer if they ask them the question. My mom, because everything's good. I don't hurt. No, I feel good, And especially when they have anger and you're needing to try to find something to help them, because there are a lot of medicines. A lot of times there are times when you need a medicine, and, I always looked at it like it's the lesser of two evils. Do you want them stressed out and angry and mad all the time, or do you want to give them something to keep them calm? And so having a good doctor that will work with you is critical. It just is, because you can't talk about them in front of them because they're going to deny everything. So try calling them. I always did both. I called them and I emailed them both and said, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we need help with. And then it's important to be on their HIPAA, sign, okay. And that way, you can talk to them. Mm-hmm. So another thing, too, along those areas is if they tend to roll out a lot, I would move your end table because they can hit their head. Every time, they roll out of bed, my mom did it. She was a roller. She was always sneaking out of bed. And so she would hit her head on the end table, and then you're trying to make the decision, do we go to the emergency room or do we not? How hard did she hit it? So I would highly recommend, with everything that Tim said, thank you to Tim, and to either get a really thin end table that you can put a light on if they like a light there, but because they will hit their head for sure. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Yes, so I'm one of 6. We never would have agreed, believe me, on anything. And so one of the things that I do with families is a conference call. It's good to have one point of reference who can kind of give me the lay of the land, on everybody in the family and what kind of, this one's in denial, this one isn't going to help, this one's taking money from them, all those different things. And then we can do a conference call. And what's great about conference calls is one person asks a question, everybody hears the answer, and you're not trying to go back and articulate to them what I've said, because this disease is so emotional. It's just hard to remember. And so I think, to me, that I've had pretty good success with that, because a lot of times, Tim can probably tell you this too, is that it comes better from somebody else than it does from anybody in the family. I'm the youngest. They didn't want to necessarily listen, even though I was my mother's main caregiver, took care of her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. When my dad came down with it, and I would try to explain to my brothers what needed to be done, some of them were, they just didn't believe me. And I thought, I've been doing this for years, and my own family doesn't believe me. So I totally understand, what it is you're saying, and happy to help you in any way along those lines. Mm-hmm. It's not just at the end sometimes. This will generally hit in the, a lot of times around, 7, 6. It can do 6, 7, 8. Take that middle stage from 1 to 10, okay? It's so, everybody's different. My mom did it for a while, and then actually she was pretty good. But we just went straight to the depends, because I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking about what you said about, does that make them think that it's okay to go? I don't really. This is my opinion. Okay, not a doctor. I think that I don't think it has that effect on them, because I just always acted like it was panties. I never said, let's put on your pull-ups. I said, let's put on your underwear, let's put on your panties, like it's no big deal. And then I think that it's, it's not until they are, nearing probably the end of the middle stage and going into the end stage that they're just going to go to the bathroom like a child. You know what I mean? They don't want to do it. It's embarrassing to them. So I don't really know. And Tim, you can maybe chime in here if you want to. But I don't think that they think it gives them permission. I just think like children just go to the bathroom. If you think about when we're raising our kids and we're trying to get them out of the diapers into underwear, I don't know that they necessarily. I mean, there are some that are going to do it intentionally. But I think on the whole, they just the brain. There's not a signal between the two where they can understand that they need to go to the bathroom. I mean, that's just inevitable with this disease. And so, yeah, sure. Right. I prompted my mom. I said, why don't we, I need to go to the bathroom. Why don't we go together? So that's a good point, Tim. Yeah, it's just like our, you got to think about our children, prompting them to, you got to prompt them to do everything. I mean, honestly, as a disease progresses, you just lead them along, once they get to that point where they don't know that they don't know anymore, and they start shadowing you and doing all those things, then, you just lead them along every day. It's like, well, let's go do this. Let's go to the bathroom. Let's go eat some lunch, let's take a bath. I mean, they're not capable of doing much on their own. So I think the earlier that you can almost, because, since he does like have numerous accidents in one day, that can be so frustrating, especially when you're out. I carried a diaper bag for a while, and then I thought, I'm going to the pull-ups. That's a good question, because they were so different in so many ways. But, actually they didn't. I mean, he was really easy. I mean, he was so sweet, and he'd say the sweetest things. We'd be like, because my mother used to tell him years ago, you're going to be a grumpy old man and nobody's going to like you, And so, the disease, just really, really made him so sweet. Don't you think, Molly? He was so sweet. And he was easy, but again, we knew what we were doing. We knew how to communicate. We knew what was coming. We knew how to read. Because we've already lived through it. It wasn't our first rodeo. We understood what we were doing. That's why these things are so important to go to learn. So he was easy compared to my mom. I mean, even though my mom was pretty easy too, but I mean, he was pretty good. He wasn't combative at all.
But he definitely went through a phase where everything was no. Are you hungry? No. You want to watch the game? No. But because we had gone through, we knew not to argue with them. Well, you haven't eaten today. Yes, I have. So I think kind of what she's saying is, we had gone through it, and we kind of knew what to not say back. And I'm not sure who asked the question and who I'm talking to. Okay. And who had to not argue and not to try to convince them. And so because for a while his answer to everything was just no.
So then you don't ask
We stopped asking. We just brought the food. We just turned on the game. We just, did those things to avoid the back and forth conflict. Like where in the beginning it was a lot of redirecting because we were asking the questions. We were trying to convince her to do things. So it's just part of the learning process.
And it's hard. It's hard to know what to say and how to get started, because Dad would come spend the night with me a lot when Gim would leave town, and I'd be like, okay, what are we going to do? And especially when he hit that no. So anyway, okay, any other questions?